Hi, I'm Kenny Fogel from Channel 6 TV, Community Focus. Got a chance just a few days ago to sit down with Dan Issel, former UK great, former Kentucky Colonel and Denver Nugget, and now he's in Bardstown. Well, he's traveling the state right now, promoting a possible NBA franchise in Louisville. And a lot of skeptics obviously think, well, we can't afford an NBA franchise in Louisville. We can't support that in any way, but he thinks we can. So I got a chance to invite him to our local Bardstown Rotary Club meeting, and that's where I got a chance to catch up with him, sit down and talk to him for a while. But here he is. I'll let you hear him for himself as speaking to our Bardstown Rotary Club on Wednesday, February the 6th. And this is Dan Issel. Again, he's trying to get an NBA basketball team to Louisville, and be honest with you, hope he succeeds.
Thank you. Every time I hear myself being introduced, it reminds me of the first time I was ever asked to do anything like this. I was a senior at UK, and a high school in Paintsville, Kentucky, asked me to come up and speak to their basketball banquet. And I was kind of nervous. I'd never done anything like that before. They said, but Coach Rupp is going to come along and make the introduction. And I thought, well, if Coach Rupp's going to go all the way to Paintsville to make the introduction, I guess I better give it a try. But about a half hour before the banquet was to begin, we got word that Coach Rupp wouldn't be able to make it. He wasn't feeling well. So they picked a gentleman out of the audience to make the introduction. I'm sure he was picked because of his standing in the community, not his knowledge of the game of basketball. Because he came to the podium and he said, they tell me this man needs no introduction. I said, I hope that's true because I never heard of it. I appreciate the opportunity to come down and talk to you a little bit about my career, about what we're doing now, trying to lure an NBA franchise to Louisville. I understand I have a few skeptics in the audience, so hopefully I can assure you that Louisville and Kentucky is able to pull that off if we give the occasion. Coming to the University of Kentucky, of course, was the best thing that ever happened to my career, but it almost didn't happen. When I came to Kentucky on my recruiting trip, there was a story in the Kentucky Colonel about who UK was interested in signing. And there was 10 or 12 forwards and 10 or 12 guards, and they got to the centers. They said the #1 center they were interested in was George Janke. Now, I grew up right outside of Chicago. George Janke played in downtown Chicago at St. Rita High School and got a lot more publicity than I did, and so I understood why Kentucky would want him first. They said the second center they wanted was a guy by the name of Joe Bergman from Clinton, Iowa. I graduated from high school the year after Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Joe Bergman was supposed to be the next Lou Alcindor, so I said, well, I can see why he's second. And I turned the page expecting to see my name at least mentioned third, and that was the end of the article. They didn't even mention my name. And so I went back to Batavia, and I wanted to go to the University of Wisconsin for some very important reasons. I don't know if you've ever been to Madison, but it's surrounded by 3 lakes, and water skiing is one of the classes you can take at Wisconsin. I thought that was pretty cool. My folks wanted me to go to Northwestern for, you know, kind of some silly reasons, like it's one of the greatest academic institutions in the country, and it was only 45 minutes from Batavia. And both of those other gentlemen wound up signing at other schools, Janke at Dayton and Bergman at Creighton. And so Kentucky upped their recruiting, and I came on a second recruiting trip and wound up playing at the University of Kentucky. And as I said, it was the greatest thing that happened to me, getting a chance to play for Coach Rupp and learn under that discipline. And you know, when people see how tall I am and they say, you must have played basketball, where'd you play? And I don't say I played for the Denver Nuggets or that I played for the Kentucky Colonels. I say I played at the University of Kentucky. And that seems to get their attention. It's, as you all know, one of the best programs in the country. After I graduated from UK, I went right up the road here to Louisville and played for the Kentucky Colonels. And a lot of people have asked me why I chose the ABA over the NBA, and it was quite simple. I'd fallen in love with Kentucky, had fallen in love with a Kentucky cheerleader, and staying in Kentucky was really important to us. And in 1975, in Louisville, we won the ABA championship, and in 25 years of organized basketball, 2 in junior high, 2 in high school, 4 in high school, 4 in Kentucky, and 15 as a professional basketball player. That was the only championship I ever won. And it was very, very special. And after that year, John Brown, who owned the franchise at that time, still wasn't making any money in his endeavor. And so he decided that he was going to sell one of his players off that championship team. And I wound up going to the Denver Nuggets. And of course, again, it was a blessing for me because a year later there was no ABA, there was no Kentucky Colonels, and the Nuggets were one of the 4 NBA teams that went into, 4 of the ABA teams that went into the NBA. And you know, I've always lamented the fact that that Kentucky Colonel team was not part of the merger, because the ABA, and most of you are too young to remember this, but the ABA had some great teams, and they had some great players. And the reason they did was until that day, until that league came along, the NBA could not sign you until your college class graduated. Now, it didn't matter if you went to college or not. Your college class had to graduate before you were eligible to go to the NBA. The ABA had no such rule. I mean, they'd sign an 8th grader if they thought he could play. And because of that, the ABA got kids that wanted to come out early, kids like Julius Erving, Moses Malone, George McInnes, George Gervin, all Hall of Famers that came to the league. And I am convinced that that Colonel's championship team was not just the best team in the ABA, that was the best team in professional basketball. And the reason I say that is because there were 4 Naismith Hall of Fame members associated with that team. Artis Gilmore, who was our center, is in the Hall of Fame. Louis Dampier, our shooting guard's in the Hall of Fame. And Hubie Brown, who was our coach, is in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. And the next to the last year, the Colonels played the Pacers in the championship game. The last year of the ABA, the Denver Nuggets played the Nets in the championship game. So you can make the argument that the 4 best teams, of the 4 best teams in the ABA, those other 3 all went to the NBA and the Colonels did not. And I often wish what had happened if John Y had kept that team together and we had been one of the teams that went in. Because the ABA teams had great success immediately after the merger. In Denver, we won the Midwest Division the first 2 years after the merger. The first NBA game after, NBA All-Star game after the merger, there were half of the 2 teams made up of former ABA players. So it was a great league. We never were able to do 2 things. When the ABA first started, the teams would paper the arena. They would give tickets away just to get people to come. And as the league got better, and as the players improved, they could never convince people to pay regular. They still wanted the free tickets or the cheap tickets. I had 2 dear friends, one that lived in Mount Washington, who used to call me up. For some reason, the Colonels, the free tickets, they take a paper punch and punch a hole in the ticket. And I had a couple of friends who called up and say, hey, you got any of those tickets tonight with the holes in them? Which meant if I could get them free tickets, they'd come to the game. If they had to pay, they'd stay home. And the second thing was we were never able to get a national TV contract. Now that wasn't a lot of money in those days. Again, some of you younger people here might not think this is true, but as late as the late 1970s, the NBA championship games were shown on tape delay after the 11 o'clock news. So it wasn't a lot of money we were talking about, but it was our inability to expose our great game in the ABA, and that's why it wound up folding. Of course, I was blessed that I got to play 10 more years in Denver and wound up coaching the Nuggets on a couple of occasions. And in fact, for years I got a paycheck for the Nuggets doing just about everything you can do with a professional sports franchise. And, one of the, aside from winning the championship with the Colonels, the second greatest thing that happened in my career was when I coached the Denver Nuggets in the early 90s. And when my staff and I took over that team, we had the worst record in the NBA for 2 consecutive years. The Nuggets were 20 and 62 and 24 and 58. And that's the team that I inherited as a head coach in Denver. But we had a great group of guys. Dikembe Mutombo from Georgetown, Alfonso Ellis from Notre Dame, Chris Jackson, who became Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf from LSU. And those kids were tired of losing, and were very coachable and worked hard. The first year we were there, we won 36 games. Second year we were there, we won 41 and made the playoffs by the skin of our teeth. And our reward was to play the Seattle Supersonics, who had the best record in the NBA. And we got killed the first 2 games. It was a 5-game series back then. We got killed the first 2 games up in Seattle, lost both of them by double digits. We came back, and in the 3rd game in Denver, Sean Kemp had 2 free throws at the very end of the game, and if he made one of them, the game was over, the series was over, and we were on vacation. We missed both of them. We won in overtime. We won the 4th game in Denver, went back to Seattle, and won the 5th game in Seattle, and that was the first time a number 8 seed had ever beaten the number 1 seed in the NBA playoffs. So that was fun. But I've been out of the game for a while, and when the group in Louisville called me and told me what they were trying to do, the name of our organization is the Louisville Basketball Investment and Support Group, and they hired me to come back to Louisville and try to get an NBA team to Louisville. And I think when they hired me, it's been almost a year ago now, I think they thought that expansion was going to happen a lot sooner than I think it's now is going to. There was a lot of buzz in Seattle. They had just gotten a group up there, the Oakwood group, had just gotten permission to renovate Key Arena in Seattle. They made application for an NHL team, which they have since been awarded. I think a lot of people thought that they would get an NBA expansion team, and that's further down the road now than I think it's going to be. But it's a fun project to work with, and it's fun to be back in with the NBA crowd again. Last September, when I was at the Hall of Fame induction ceremonies, the Hall of Fame invites all of the former inductees back, and I talked to several NBA officials, and they all think that expansion is inevitable. They can't give a timeline. But the reason is because everything that's basketball related income, the season tickets, the regular ticket sales, TV revenue, all of that has to be split 50-50 with the players. That's where they come up with the salary cap number. Expansion fees are not BRI, and so expansion fees would go directly to the owner's pockets, and so that's why most people you talk to think it's inevitable. Now, when it happens, there's going to be a lot of competition for those teams. Seattle, of course, wants one. Las Vegas has come to the forefront of wanting one. San Diego wants one. Kansas City. And so even when the NBA does expand, there's going to be real competition for those teams. One of the things, another thing that has made us excited about the possibilities is last fall, the mayor of Richmond, Virginia, commissioned a study to see kind of where his city, Richmond, Virginia, fell in the line of cities that would like to attract professional sports. It was done by a company called the Huntington Strategic Group. And their study was based on population size, market growth, disposable income, those kinds of factors. And they said the first list was of all of the cities in North America, all of the cities in the United States and Canada that do not have any of the 4 major league sports teams, basketball, hockey, baseball, NFL. How are the cities ranked to be able to support a professional team? The number 1 city was Austin, Texas. The second city was Louisville, Kentucky. Then they also did a study. They said, okay, you can have one of those other leagues, baseball, hockey, football, but what about the cities that don't have an NBA team? And those cities were ranked Seattle, Vancouver, San Diego, and Louisville, Kentucky. And what I find interesting about that list is Seattle, Vancouver, and San Diego have all had NBA teams and lost them. San Diego's had 2. You may not remember the Houston Rockets started in San Diego, and then of course the Clippers. Another thing to look at is the ticket prices. People say, well, we can't afford NBA tickets in Louisville. Our economic models are based on an average ticket price. Now, obviously, if you want to sit courtside or if you want to sit in a suite, but an average ticket price of $46 for a ticket to go to an NBA game in Louisville. Now, I don't know if any of you are season ticket holders at the University of Louisville or at the University of Kentucky. I have 2 tickets, 5 rows behind where Cal stands and on the UK bench. Those 2 tickets cost me $12,500 a year for those tickets because of the seat tax. There's a $10,000 seat tax that goes with it. And I'm going to pick on my alma mater a little bit here, but for $12,500, I get to see Vermont, Utah Valley State, all of the good teams they play. Now they have changed it this year. The University of Kansas was a game in Rotary. All of the good tickets, all the good teams they play are at neutral sites in Chicago and New Orleans and Indianapolis and New York. And so the argument can be made that ticket prices for a professional team aren't going to be any more, probably less than they are for the University of Kentucky. And I don't know about U of L, but I'm assuming they have the seat tax as well. We really have 3 major challenges that we have to address to bring a team to Louisville. The first one is finding somebody who will write a check. We're going on the basis that a new franchise will cost $1 billion for the expansion fee and another $400 million to get the team up and going. And it might be more than that. The expansion fee might be more than that. And you say, well, we'll never find that. We have 7 different groups currently under NDAs that we're talking to about stepping up and doing that. And the timeline is what's really hurting us now, because, you know, we don't know if it's going to happen in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And so to get somebody to really step up and make a commitment when they don't know what the timeline is one of the challenges we're facing. Second challenge is one that I've already talked about, and that is, when is the NBA going to expand, and you know what the competition will be for those teams. And the third challenge is, where do we play? And the Young Center, if Louisville went into the NBA today, the Young Center, excuse me, would be one of the top 5, 6, 7 arenas in the whole league. It's a marvelous facility. The lease that the University of Louisville has right now with the Young Center would preclude any NBA team ever playing there. Not because of dates. The dates would be able to work out. There's a lot of arenas around the country that have basketball and hockey. That's 83 dates a year. The Staples Center in Los Angeles has 2 basketball teams and a hockey team. That's 120 some dates a year. So the dates would be easy to work out. But the fact that the University of Louisville shares in all of the revenue of any event that takes place in the Young Center would make it impossible under the current arrangement for an NBA team to play there. Again, because we don't know the timeline, there is no immediacy to getting it worked out. We haven't talked to the people at the Young Center. All I know is that Mr. Cox, who runs the Young Center, has said it would be challenging but doable if we were able to get an NBA team there. So, what do we do in the meantime? We keep talking to the people that we're talking to about being able to write a check for the team. We keep talking to people around the league to make sure we have a pulse on what the timing might be. And thirdly, we're doing exactly what I'm doing here today. And that is going out, speaking, telling the story about the NBA, trying to alleviate some of the ideas and thoughts that just aren't true, and build a grassroots support so when this happens, our application is on the top of the stack. Anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Those check writers, do you have those in place?
What?
The check writers.
Well, as I said, we're talking to 7 different groups right now. Two of the groups are in the real estate development business. One in Washington, one in New York. And they have a real interest in renovating the area around Freedom Hall. A lot of these bigger cities, and Louisville has one to a certain extent out east of town, Norton Commons, where you have, you know, they're planned cities. You have apartments, you have condos, you have beautiful homes, you have restaurants, everything within walking distance. And the 2 real estate development are interested in maybe doing that around the Freedom Hall area and renovating Freedom Hall. But we have not had somebody say, when this happens, we'll write you a check. But I feel certain that at least one of these groups would step up if they knew the timetable was inevitable. Yes, sir.
Talk about checks. Could you talk a little bit about the salaries of the creative accounting that went on during the ADA years? Because I've read a lot about that. Pretty interesting.
Well, this is going to sound like sour grapes, and I promise you it's not. I mean, I'm sure that Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain were appalled at what I made when I was playing, because it was a lot more than what they were getting paid. 2 years ago, the Denver Nuggets signed a free agent by the name of Paul Millsap. He was at the Atlanta Hawks, had been an all-star, really good player, great player. Won't be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, he's not that type of player. And they signed him for a 3-year deal for $30 million a year. Now, $30 million a year, I can't even comprehend that. So I got my calculator out. Paul Millsap makes more a game than I made the first 5 years I played professional basketball. More a game. And you know, you say, well, those numbers are stupid. Of course they're stupid. But it's all calculated on how much money the league is making. But this last TV contract that the NBA signed almost doubled the salary cap in 2 years because half of that money had to go to the players. But getting back to answer your question, there were a lot of things that the ABA didn't have a problem with stretching the truth a little bit, and so you know that they would announce that players had signed contracts for millions of dollars when you know they might have put $50,000 in an annuity, and you know 75 years from now it would be worth $1.5 million. So it really wasn't exactly what. But you have to understand, when I went to Denver in 1976, 2 years later, David Thompson, who many of you might remember from North Carolina State, could jump out of the gym, great player, signed a contract making $800,000 a year. And when he did that, the second highest paid player in the league was Kareem, making $375,000 a year. So, you know, and that was a long time ago, but not that long ago that they now make $30 million a year. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Well, talking about expansion of the NBA, I mean, obviously it's changed over the years, and with expansion, you're bringing in a lot of players to the NBA that previously would never have played in the NBA. So how does that affect the quality of the teams we're looking at?
Well, that's a good question. You know, there are teams right now in the NBA that aren't very good. I mean, I watch some of these games, and me and 4 of you all could beat some of them. I know one thing for sure. Me and 4 of you all could shoot free throws better than me. I mean, the other day, who was I watching? I don't know. I watch so much basketball, my wife doesn't talk to me half the time. I was watching somebody, and at halftime they were 3 for 10 from the free throw line. I promise you, I could shoot left-handed today and make 3 out of 10. I mean, I just can't. What were we talking about? I forgot. I went off on a tangent there. Oh, the quality. There would only be 2 teams would add 24 players. So I don't think it would water down that too much. We were talking earlier, Kenny, about the one and done. One of the things, not one of the things, the thing that is on the highest priority of the commissioner right now is to straighten out this one and done thing. It hasn't worked for anybody. College basketball is almost unwatchable because of, you know, people going 3 for 10 from the free throw line. If you don't have a dog in the fight, you're just watching the quality of basketball. It ain't that good. And so what he wants to do, and the fallacy is that the NBA wants it. They don't want these kids getting to the NBA any quicker than we want them leaving college. You know, they don't want to babysit them for 2-3 years before they're ready to play in the league. And so what's number one on the commissioner's list is straightening out the one and done. And I think when it's all said and done, I think what you'll see is college baseball has it right. I don't know if you all are familiar with their rules. If you want to go ride a bus in the minor leagues right out of high school, God bless you, go. And believe me, I understand the economics of it. Some of these kids don't have 2 nickels to rub together, and they've grown up in poverty, and that money, they can't wait to get there and be able to do some things for their family, and I get all that. But baseball, if you say, I'm not going pros, I'm going to go to college, you have to stay in college for 3 years. And I think that's a great plan. I don't know if the NBA would ever be able to have these kids stay 3 years, but at least 2 years. And I think that would make it better for everybody.
Amen.
But you know, and you say, well, why doesn't the NBA just do that? Why don't they make it arbitrary? If they did that, the first kid who went to court and said, you're depriving me of a living, that kid would be in the NBA. And so you have to, in all of these things, you have to have the blessing and the agreement of the NBA Players Association to make it happen. Anybody?
I color me one of the skeptics on the NBA to Louisville. The question I keep asking myself is, are there enough people who are not already spending their money on Kentucky or Louisville games, or Indiana, Western, whoever else, to be able to support that, 41 days out of the year plus,
Right.
Plus preseason.
Right. And I can understand that, and that certainly is a question. My answer to that would be, we have reams of data that says there's enough people and enough disposable income in Louisville. Now, we would have to have the support of the entire state. I mean, I've been in Owensboro, I've been in Lexington, I've been in Winchester, I've now been in Bardstown, and we would need everybody to support the team. We couldn't just take, people that are inside the Gene Snyder to support it. I understand that. But Louisville's market is larger than New Orleans or Salt Lake City. Oklahoma City and Memphis are just a tick behind Louisville. And the NBA seems to like cities like the four I just mentioned, Sacramento, Orlando, other places where the NBA is the only team in town. Now, the first couple of years, I think there'd be great support for it because it's something new. Louisville and Kentucky would be major league. After that, it would be incumbent on the people that are running the team to put a product on the floor that you would want to support. Or the arena would be half empty like it is in some of the places in the NBA today that aren't very good. I mean, I understand all of that, but the Hunden Group wouldn't have said, based on market size, population growth, disposable, and some of those other factors, they wouldn't have said Louisville was the second rated city in the United States if that wasn't true. Yes, sir.
If you consider the best player you ever played against, who would you want as your first teammate today? How about this, overall, when you were playing, who would you?
Well, my first teammate would be a gentleman who was my roommate for 4 years, and while I was with the Colonels, and is my best friend to this day, and that's Louis Dampier. That would be my favorite teammate. As far as the toughest player I ever had to play against, it was Moses Malone, because I had the ability. Coach Rupp. Do I have enough time? Is anybody watching?
All the time you want.
If you have to leave, just leave. I won't be offended. Coach Rupp started every practice with a half hour of shooting, and it wasn't take a shot, talk to your buddy. It was take a shot, run after it, dribble back out, take another shot. And as a center, I got awful bored doing layups and hook shots for 30 minutes a day. So I started developing an outside shot. And that served me very well in my pro career playing center, because the only other center in the NBA that was shorter than I was Wes Unseld from the University of Louisville that played at Bullets. Every night I stepped on the floor, I was playing against somebody an inch, 2, 4, 6 taller than I was. And so being able to shoot, I could draw those big guys away from the basket who just, it wasn't that they couldn't guard people on the floor, they just weren't used to it. Moses Malone was so quick. I mean, he could cover me 20 feet from the basket as well as he could cover me on the low post. So he was the toughest one I ever played against.
What about Art Lab? I went to high school with him, and I think gave him the opportunity to sit on the bench at Kentucky for 3 years and watch you play.
My freshman year, and I've kept up with Art. Art lives in the same retirement community that my mother and father did before they passed away, and where my sister and brother-in-law live now. It's in Hot Springs, Arkansas, called Hot Springs Village. This is the neatest place. It's an old logging acreage, and they put a road through it, put a gate at both ends, and so there's some security. There's like 9 or 10 golf courses and clubhouses, and it's really nice. That's where William is today. But my freshman year, the year before me, Kentucky signed 5 players. 3 of them didn't make their grades, and Bobby Hiles transferred to Moorhead. So the year ahead of me, there was only 1 scholarship player, Phil Argento. And so there weren't any, I mean, in those days there weren't any limits on scholarships or anything. So Coach Rupp that year signed 12 players to scholarship. And Art was a junior college player. He was one of the 12. We had 6 all-state players from Kentucky. Jimmy Dinwiddie from Litchfield, Terry Mills from Barberville, Bill Busey and Mike Casey from Shelbyville, Clint Wheeler and Benny Spears from Ashland. We had the best player from the state of Ohio in Mike Pratt. We had the best player from the state, supposedly, the best player from the state of Tennessee and from the state of Alabama. And so we had 12 guys my freshman year. And I'll tell you how smart I was. I was the 12th one to sign. No competition. Yes, ma'am.
So we all know Rupp, obviously, but so what was it like to play for Rupp?
Coach Rupp was a strict disciplinarian. If you can believe this, we weren't allowed to talk in practice. Only on the defensive end of the floor, you know, yelling out switch or
Right.
in the layup line we couldn't talk. And he was so brilliant. You didn't have to scout Kentucky. All you had to do was go down to the bookstore and buy one of his books, and every play that we ran, he had diagrams right in his book. But we practiced them and ran them with such precision that you knew what was coming. I mean, there was one play, if the guard passes it to the forward and goes behind him, that's one play. If he passes it and goes in front of him, that's another. If he throws it to the other guard, that's another. If he throws it to the center, we didn't call any plays. We just ran them that way.
Aren't they all disciplined to pass you the ball?
We ran those a little more often.
When you played
You've heard the story, haven't you, about we were playing Notre Dame in the NCAA tournament. And about the first 4 or 5 minutes, I hadn't touched the basketball. And Coach Rupp stands up, calls timeout. We all come over and sit around. He said to the other guys that were there, he said, "This is Dan Issel." He said, "He's your teammate. Now pass him the basketball." And that was it. He turned around and walked away. But he was, some players you have to pat on the back to get them to play. Some players you have to kick in the tail to motivate them. Coach Rupp's philosophy was you kicked everybody in the tail. And if they couldn't take it, he didn't want you on his team to start with. Now, I was telling Kenny earlier, I was really blessed because after I graduated, I got to have a relationship with Coach Rupp because we did a basketball camp together for a couple of summers. He was associated with the Colonels, and so I got to know him more as a friend, and I loved him. I absolutely loved him. I mean, he made me an All-American basketball player because I could take the
Kick in the butt.
My favorite Coach Rupp story. When we played in Louisville, different than today. Today, every player and his entourage goes a different direction. When we played, except for maybe a couple of the single guys, after the game, we'd all go to the same restaurant. Artis, Louis, Darryl Carrier, we'd all go to the same restaurant, or somebody would have a party at their house. So whenever we had it at our house, Coach Rupp would stop by on the way back home to Lexington. So he loved his bourbon. And so I would fix him a bourbon and have it ready to hand to him when he walked in the door. One night he comes in, I handed him bourbon, he said, "Can't have it, Dan." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "The doctor's on me, my diabetes is flaring up," and said, "I have to lay off the hard stuff." He said, "Do you have any vodka?" Yes, sir.
Do you overlap some with Maravich?
Yes, sir.
You got anything to say about playing against Maravich?
Again, Coach Rupp, we were contemporaries. We were exact same. And a lot of the coaches in the SEC would try to devise ways to stop Pete. You know, they'd play a triangle and two, double team him, or a box and one, and try not to. But Pete was so clever with the basketball in his dribbling and his passing. Greatest dribbler and passer I ever saw, bar none. Magic Johnson, not close. So because he could always get open with the basketball. So Coach Rupp's philosophy was, we're going to play straight up, one-on-one. We're just going to make sure nobody else on the team beats us. So poor Terry Mills or Jim Dinwiddie had to guard him one-on-one. We played 6 times head-to-head. Twice sophomore, twice junior, twice senior. In those 6 games, Pete averaged 52 points a game. The closest they ever came to beating us was 9. So that was.
You had some big games against him too.
Yeah, but you were averaging about 40-something points against him.
I tell people my senior year at Kentucky, I was 2nd in the nation in scoring. And I only lost the scoring championship by 10 points a game. I averaged 34 and Pete averaged 44 points a game. Well, thank you. Yes, sir. One more.
Just to kind of go back in time, Bill Kuiper, he was a great old man. When I was up there, I was the equipment manager for football. Of course, he was basketball.
Yeah.
He was just a great guy all the way around.
That goes, when I was there, George Hukel was the equipment manager, and George was also a former postal worker. And he sat back there in the cubicle. Our practice uniforms were those old men, well, I guess I'd wear them today. But the old men wore the undershirts, you know, not with the collars, but just the straps, white shorts and wool socks. That was our practice. And Coach Rupp was so, I almost said tight, let's say frugal. That sounds better. George Hukel would sit in the back and darn those wool socks if they got a hole in them. So, but then George, he and Bill were good friends. And then as George's health started to decline, that's when he brought Kitely. Yeah, there aren't too many equipment managers that have ever sat in the first seat on a college basketball bench. That's for sure. Thank you all very much. It was great being with you.